Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I haven't been online for a while. I apologize for that. Usually don't take like 10-day breaks, but it's been quite busy and tasty with family stuff and a little bit of university stuff. So here I am back. I know most of you who are watching from the US have had a nice Thanksgiving weekend, hopefully, anyways. And to all the viewers who obviously haven't been on a holiday, and might have appreciated some content, I apologize, but let's be honest, there wasn't that much new information about Apple over the last week anyway, until there was. So here we are now. Now, what exactly am I talking about today, and why is my title so negative in comparison to everything else? Well, I want to start by reading out this shit. I'm sorry. It's from Sheriff Deputies. I guess it's it's a Facebook account, I think. I don't use Facebook. Whatever. Important privacy update. If you have an iPhone and have done the recent iOS 17 update, they've installed a feature called NameDrop. This feature allows you to easily share contact information and photos to another iPhone by just holding the phones close together. This feature is defaulted to on. To shut this feature off, go to Settings, General, AirDrop, Bringing Devices Together, and change to off. Parents, don't forget to change these settings on your child's phone to help keep them safe as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am fully back because this has infuriated me the second I got my eyes on it. I'm actually really happy that larger websites are obviously much faster in reacting than I am. So thank you to 9to5Mac, Mac Rumors, Apple Insider, Cult of Mac, all those other awesome websites to covering this atrocious issue. Because that issue is not actually NameDrop being problematic, it's the way NameDrop is covered. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me be 100% clear. NameDrop, as it currently stands, is not a security risk or privacy risk whatsoever. Not in any way, shape, or form is it worse than what you would expect an AirDrop feature to be. So how exactly are we looking at this topic? Well, AirDrop is obviously when you use the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity of iPhones to recognize each other and send data to each other. Now, NameDrop is an extension of that feature. It's primarily for sharing contact information or to a small degree bringing devices together, which is a part of NameDrop or a part of AirDrop, however you want to see it. It's about linking devices with AirDrop to each other, especially now that iPhones have a U-series chip, so ultra-wideband functionality, and she has ultra-wideband functionality as well. When you bring those iPhones together, they recognize each other. There's Bluetooth technology that recognizes devices getting closer together. That's how HomePods can recognize your iPhone coming close. There's the ultra-wideband chip. All of that jazz, right? And Apple thought to itself, okay, right, we now have devices basically recognizing how close I am to another device. What kind of cool, sort of personal feature could we add to it? Ironically, a feature that on NFC devices has been like present, not in this not quite in this form, but similarly. What feature could we add that people would like, that would feel a little whimsy, right? I wish I could show it to you, but unfortunately I only have one iPhone on me and it's using to film me. Well, if you bring those iPhones to each other, they will share your contact information. That's why it's called NameDrop, because obviously your name is part of your contact. However, it's very important to consider, no AirDrop sharing works without unlocking the device with Face ID, Touch ID, or your passcode, depending on your device, obviously, between Face ID and Touch ID. And NameDrop has the exact same limitation. Now, this is mind-boggling to me, because the way this police, I don't know, deputy officer or some anything is covering this is they're basically implying that as long as you have another person's iPhone and you just bump them together, right? Remember the old Craig Federighi jab towards Samsung, where they had like their NFC functionality and then Apple introduced AirDrop and it worked from further apart. Well, now Apple also has like stuff where you bump your phones together to achieve new functionality. But this is still hidden behind a security authentication wall, basically. And that wall is also, just like 95Mac points out, by the way, you can check out this on Apple's support website, you need to be logged in through Face ID, Touch ID, or your passcode in order to share that information. So unless somebody's bringing your phone together with theirs and also forces you to authenticate your phone, at that point you have a billion of other problems. It reminds me of the old issue of like, well, what if somebody cuts off your finger to use Touch ID? I'm like, bro, once you have a gangster who's willing to cut off your finger to access Touch ID, you have a bunch of other problems with that gangster beyond him or her just stealing your phone. Believe me. So, but with this, right, people wanted to talk about this. Yeah, it was the sheriff's office, right? So people and a lot of Karens, let's call them, on Facebook or Twitter were like complaining, oh no, my child is now so unsafe. Anybody can do this. Well, no, that's 100% not the case. I want to both calm you people down, but also make fun of everyone who will post shit like this. So I'll just close it because it's just getting me more aggravated, right? And if you actually want to turn it off for whatever reason, I think it's actually quite a cool feature. As they said, go to settings, then general, then AirDrop, and Apple calls that bringing devices together. This is, as I said, NameDrop is part of that, but there are some other features like just devices basically linking to each other, so they have like really fast AirDrop connectivity and stuff like that. So Apple summarizes this as bringing devices together under AirDrop. I don't know what else to say about this. This just infuriated me because it's so stupid. Because people call it about the dangers, right? I mean, it's actually less dangerous in that regard, but I would liken it somewhat to the dangers of having AirDrop enabled for everyone and then potentially getting a dick pic, right? Because obviously you see a preview of the image that somebody else is like trying to send you. And there are obviously ways around it, right? You say like only AirDrop for those who are in your contacts, or you limit the time where your AirDrop is visible. So Apple has actually worked around that. But this is a danger because this was AirDrop, right? It's because it was like wide range AirDrop. This is actually infinitely more secure because it requires you to authenticate your phone and then bring it towards another phone, or alternatively you authenticate it while you're like bumping them together. So yeah, it's a completely ridiculous issue. I just wanted to cover this because I know that not everybody who watches me is like a technophile in the same way that I am. And sometimes if you see that, especially if you have kids, you might get a little scared, you might get a little worried. So I really wanted to give you some calming sense, even though my voice is obviously not calm, about this kind of problem. Now, I've made my thumbnail really aggressive in the sense that I've shown like, oh, Apple is on fire, but they're saying, oh, it's going to be fine, right? That's famous meme. Well, the reason why I'm actually covering all those three issues today, I think some of them are worse than others in general. I think this is a non-issue whatsoever. It's more a public perception issue than anything real, which granted, public perception unfortunately is probably the most real thing in the world. So I'm trying to combat it in whatever limited capacity I have. Now, the other issues, they do have a little more nuance, but they are also not quite as big of a problem as I think some people are making it out to be. Now, this is a relatively recent report. However, it should also be noted that it's not entirely new. For a while, we knew that Goldman Sachs, the distributor of the Apple Card in the United States, which is basically Apple's credit card, which offers you some decent payback bonuses. Primarily, it works best if you really plan to buy a lot of Apple-related services and products with it. It's a decent card. A lot of people just like for it being a cool, pretty titanium card. However, and of course, it works beautifully with the wallet app, with how you pay, make down payments and stuff like that. And then Apple extended its functionality with everything from Apple Cash and stuff like that. I don't want to get into this because obviously Apple Card is quite a difficult issue to cover for anybody outside the United States because it's limited, unfortunately, to the United States. But what we heard is that Apple Card is giving problems to Goldman Sachs because with all those bonuses, especially on Apple services and Apple products, well, apparently they're losing quite a bit of money on it. We don't know exactly how much. Probably around $1 billion, can be as little as $500 million, can be as much as 1.5 to 2 billion. Obviously, it's not like they will immediately come forward while the deal with Apple is still running. And it seems like for the next 12 to 15 months, this is probably for how long the contract is still running, Apple will still keep the Apple Card as is being issued by Goldman Sachs. However, after this, probably not, right? What does that exactly mean? Well, to be quite honest, neither me nor most people out there fully know what this means, right? The Apple Card, even though it's an Apple Card, is run by Goldman Sachs. All the banking stuff behind it is Goldman Sachs. Now, obviously, Apple is giving them a little bit of money to run this, and there's an incentive here because Apple customers will obviously probably do more purchasing than your average credit card customer because Apple devices are known to be rather expensive. So you're probably befriending, so to speak, a lot of higher income people. But it seems like it's not working out quite as well for Goldman Sachs as they expected. So it seems like Apple did not offer them any kind of better contract, maybe with Apple eating some of the money associated with it. And yeah, according to this report, in the next 12 to 15 months, this agreement will come to an end. And then we don't actually know what Apple will be doing. Now, Cult of Mac is also covering previous reports where it's about Goldman Sachs losing money on this. Again, I cannot speak to the exact amount. I just want to tell you, I know big companies are known to be greedy. And when we're talking about greed, we're usually talking about, is the company willing to live with a 10% profit margin or a 20% profit margin or 30% profit margin. But when we're talking about companies actually losing money, it's hard to actually be angry at either company here. You could maybe make the point that Apple should be eating that money, given that it's a quality of life feature they're offering to their own customers. But then again, Goldman Sachs wants those customers to also have their credit cards, so it's a difficult issue in that regard. However, it seems that basically the dam has been broken for Goldman Sachs. They are out, and we don't know who is in or if there will be somebody new in general. Apple and Goldman Sachs are focused on providing an incredible experience for our customers to help them lead healthier financial lives. The award-winning Apple Card, that's important, the Apple Card is extremely well received, has seen a great reception from consumers and will continue to innovate and deliver the best tools and services for them. So, yeah, this is basically how Apple comments it. This does mention Goldman Sachs, so it definitely seems like I think if there was a chance of this deal coming to an end rather abruptly, Apple wouldn't mention Goldman Sachs in this way. However, Apple could easily replace Goldman Sachs, for example, with American Express. Now, American Express obviously is an absolute behemoth in the banking business, in the credit card business, to be more precise. But it's obviously not a one-to-one translation. Now, it's actually not too difficult to like transfer credit card information and credit scores from one company to the next. I think it's very likely that Apple wouldn't even have to need to work as an intermediary here. I think Apple would just have to make sure that all the customers feel like welcome with American Express right away if they want to. I don't know if this would be an automatic process or if people had to opt in. You could make the argument, oh, people have like an arrangement with Apple, but truly the arrangement is with Goldman Sachs. So if Goldman Sachs like goes away from here, then it goes to American Express, and then maybe people would have to opt in again. If it's all legally running through Apple, then Apple could just make the argument, well, whoever is our banking partner, that's up to us. That sometimes happens, by the way, when banks are acquired by other banks. Your data gets immediately transferred. You don't really get a say in that. So I don't know the details here. I'm also no legal like banking expert. However, there's one final issue regarding this that I want to cover, is because obviously we as customers wouldn't really feel much of a difference if the most automatic thing happens, right? Goldman Sachs is out, Apple accepts American Express as their new banking partner. Maybe you don't even have to opt in, or you opt in once on like your wallet app and then you get sent a new credit card. But there is another issue to this that to me is very important, and that is Apple Card obviously is highly limited in the regions where it's available. Now, as big as Goldman Sachs is, American Express as a worldwide business is far more impressive in that regard. My question is, would Apple switching to somebody like American Express potentially result in Apple Card finally making its way out of the United States and into other regions? That to me, as somebody living in Germany, is both interesting, and also I'm still pessimistic because Germany is very slow in those kinds of adopting these kinds of services anyway, unfortunately. However, if it still works like a regular American Express card, like my mom uses American Express, it's not like American Express is not present in Germany, but yeah, obviously a lot of like these new Apple services, they either start out in the United States, right? Apple Pay started in the United States primarily, but then it had a really nice worldwide rollout. It took a while, maybe even too long in certain regions, but that was hardly ever Apple's fault, right? You even have like health-related features on the Apple Watch that are certified by like the health organizations in the United States, for example, the ECG on the Apple Watch, but even that made its way throughout the world at some point. Well, Apple Card has not done that yet, and we don't know what was the problem. Was it Apple itself? Was it American regulations versus like European regulations or Asian regulations? Was it Goldman Sachs? Was it Goldman Sachs not being able to negotiate like deals in Europe or anything? Or was Goldman Sachs maybe afraid of offering this money-losing card to potentially millions of new customers and then losing even more money on it? Well, we don't know. We also don't know what the deal would be like if American Express takes over. Are the benefits the same as they were before? Might there be now a more premium version that you actually have to pay for, right? Because a lot of like premium credit cards, your golds, your platinums, your blacks, depending on the brand that you use, right? They require you to pay a regular fee. That's because you have even some insurances running through your credit card, like your travel insurance and stuff like that. You collect extra miles for flying and stuff like that through your credit card. Obviously, Apple's credit card in that regard is quite a low tier, so to speak, because it's also free. So would we now get multiple tiers potentially here with American Express now also offering you basically an equivalent to their more premium credit card offerings? All of this is speculation. I don't know even obviously if this report is 100% true. However, I'm inclined to believe it because it just makes sense with all the previous stuff we've heard about. Goldman Sachs, like financial problems regarding the Apple Card. We've already heard about a potential partner up with American Express. There is a distinct chance that Apple might let go of the Apple Card business whatsoever. However, I'm not inclined to believe that, at least not at this point. If Apple sees this like as a long-term like money losing enterprise, then yeah, maybe if a credit card company comes to them and says, oh, we want like $2 billion up front to cover all our expenses and stuff like that, I doubt that Apple would take it on this way, but I would believe that maybe they could negotiate something like multiple tiers of Apple Card with American Express, which at that point, if like your Goldman Sachs card expires, right, and Apple comes to you and says, oh, you're eligible for an American Express version of the Apple Card, let's just narrow it down to the US where people already have Apple Cards, right? And then do you want to stay on a free tier, right, with the almost the same benefits, maybe the exact same benefits, or would you like to pay a monthly or an annual fee and receive those extra benefits? And I think this would likely be more sustainable. Apple Card always being completely free made sense as like an addendum to like Apple's offerings, right? But once you start looking at it from the perspective of the banking partner, it becomes a little bit more of a nuanced issue, right? So this is not still an Apple on fire issue. For one, there are 12 to 15 months apparently here for Apple to either renegotiate with Goldman Sachs, find a new banking partner, find a new solution altogether. We've actually had news or rumors that Apple might be planning to basically become their own bank. Could they be ready in 12 to 15 months to offer their own services in that regard? And if that happens, would Apple be willing to potentially lose billions of dollars in a similar capacity to how Goldman Sachs did as the partner of Apple for Apple Card? So a lot of nuance here. I think we'll actually see a lot of different coverage about this in like maybe 6 to 9 months. So I'm actually really interested in this. I'm also interested in what you guys think. Now I know that most of my viewers come from like India, Egypt, Bangladesh, Indonesia. So I don't actually have that many US viewers. I think you guys are like half a percentage point of my viewers. But if you actually are a user of Apple Card, please let me know how the Apple Card works out for you. If you would have any problems switching from Goldman Sachs to American Express, if that just happens automatically, would you maybe have some kind of issue with that potentially? And if Apple Card goes away, what will be like your fallback solution, right? I from what I understand, most Apple Card owners are also owners of other credit cards, just because Apple Card is relatively new, so people just had other credit cards prior. Maybe some transfer theirs, maybe some people have like 2 credit cards running simultaneously. So I'm just interested to hear your guys' opinion on it. So, and now you see actually why I wanted to make this video, don't you? Here, I covered NameDrop, a complete non-issue in that regard, right? And me as a YouTuber am trying to add context to this by basically covering how the actual technology works, what the actual security or privacy risks are, and if you should actually be worried, right? And here I completely debunked all the bullshit talking points that might be out there potentially on Facebook, Twitter, maybe your neighbors or something like that. And then there are other issues that potentially will have an actual impact on consumers, right? But you might not actually hear about it as much as you would hear about NameDrop. So there's a point, there's a possibility that if you're an Apple Card user, well, you might no longer be one in 12 to 15 months, or there will be some changes to however you have to use your Apple Card, because maybe American Express enacts like other requirements or something like that. So that's, as a consumer, is something you should have to consider, but it's still not Apple being on fire. Now, there is one segment that I do want to cover today, and that is where it seems like a part of Apple might actually be on fire, and it might actually like be connected to a company that is notorious for sort of being on fire recently. Well, it's about Apple's 5G modem development, which, as you know, or I hope you know, is actually something that Apple acquired from Intel, because Intel used to make their own modems, but then basically failed in the 5G race, so Apple acquired their 5G modem development for, I believe, around $1 billion or something. And now Apple has been working on their own modem ever since. But for every 5G iPhone, they've been using Qualcomm modems, right? X50, X55, X60, X65 modems. Well, and for years we've heard, especially from like guys like Mark Gurman, that Apple would finally offer us a solution of their own when it comes to 5G connectivity, and that would potentially happen in 2025, maybe a little later. So what is happening right now? Well, it might be that Apple is discontinuing in-house modem development after several unsuccessful attempts to perfect its own custom 5G modem chip. However, this is coming from unconfirmed reports out of Asia. Now, I want to cover this because, similar to how with Goldman Sachs, we've actually had like credible reports about Goldman Sachs losing money on this. Apple may be considering another banking partner, right? Here, we've actually had credible reports of Apple's 5G modem development not working out quite well. So the idea that they are entirely discontinuing it, that's obviously quite an extreme scenario, but it becomes more realistic once you consider it in the context of obviously them making about them having problems down the road with 5G modem development. Now, this comes from UX1122 and from TechReef. I have no idea. I don't cover those guys. Or at least I'm not sure I ever did, so I cannot speak to their credibility. I have not like spontaneously found much reporting from them that has ever been substantiated. However, I've also not found much at all. So maybe you guys can let me know if those guys are worth listening to whatsoever. But it seems like the modem development had failed so far. Now, it should be important that this kind of statement is actually not quite as egregious of saying that Apple is completely shutting it down, because we know that Apple's development efforts thus far have failed. Well, how do we know that? Well, because we don't yet have a new 5G modem, and every reporting thus far has suggested that if Apple could, they would put their own 5G modem into iPhones. Now, they do have a longer running Qualcomm contract. It's very likely that it will have to be extended. Apple might probably be super cautious and extend it like to 2030 at this point. But saying the modems have failed so far, it's not quite a death nail. However, it's then proceeded as to be explained as Apple is now in the process of winding down its years-long investments in the project. There have been some counterpoints to this, where some in the tech space have said it might be the case that Apple has found a design for them that works, and now they're trying to like specify a specific chip, right? If you imagine like a team of 100 people or whatever working on a specific technology, you will always have those people working on this technology overall. That's how Apple's camera team works, right? I believe Apple has like 1,000 people working on cameras when you count all of the development together. But then there are people that work on camera technologies that might years down the road, and there are people that might work on camera technology for the iPhone that is absolutely just hitting the prototype phase and will be coming out next year, right? So there might be a point that Apple is restructuring the teams to maybe now have one specific 5G modem that at some point will come out. The iPhone SE that would supposedly inherit the design of the iPhone 14 was such a candidate to get Apple's 5G modem. So maybe that would be the case, and then a larger group of people is working on modem technology in general. However, I am not so sure about this. This is just one thing that I've read as a counterpoint. I want to present it to you. This doesn't quite make sense to me. I don't think that somebody would really like phrase it this way if what I just described was the case. But it's still, it might be a possibility. It's too early to say if the latest reports are accurate, but they are also bringing it into context with a September Wall Street Journal report where they've had major issues, supposedly unrealistic goals, an inadequate understanding of the challenges involved. Yeah, it should be said that Apple has been incredibly successful with Apple Silicon, right? And maybe Apple was like very ambitious in that regard. Maybe they thought like, oh, we can replicate what we did with like Apple Silicon processors in the modem space. But there's a lot that goes into it. There's the reason why even Intel with their resources failed, why we basically only have one major player in that area anymore, and that's Qualcomm. We do have some alternatives from Samsung and MediaTek that aren't as good, and then we have like Broadcom focusing more on Wi-Fi and Bluetooth rather than 5G. And then we have like companies like Ericsson working more on the 5G infrastructure rather than specific 5G functionality inside phones. So it's actually a really small market when it comes to 5G technology. This is why a lot of companies just feel comfortable licensing it out from Qualcomm because they're currently the best. They currently can produce in whatever capacity you pretty much need to. So there isn't that much reason to consider anybody else, unless you're stupid like Google and then you buy Samsung modems and then you wonder why your device runs hot, has terrible battery life potentially. That's the other alternative here. And Apple supposedly had unusable prototypes. I don't know what that honestly means. Could it be that like Apple like created modems that downright didn't work, or could they have like phones where the modem like failed to work together with like the rest of the OS or the antenna or whatever? So yeah, it looks pretty bad. Now, yes, Apple acquired Intel's modem business in 2019. Now, while that might sound like a long time for like 4 years from now, which actually is interesting because this was when originally Apple expected to ship their own modems, it's actually not quite unheard of for companies to need like half a decade to even a full decade to incorporate like a new team into itself with like a brand new like division, basically having to hire new people, having to acquire intellectual property, having to license intellectual property, which like Apple does have a patent sharing agreement with Qualcomm. However, none of that ever guarantees that you will ever be successful. I think Apple Car is probably in a similar state or is already past that phase, because I'm kind of inclined to believe that if Apple actually still had plans to, as was originally believed, to around 2026 to 2027 start either launching or even just announcing their cars, we would hear something about that by now. You just don't launch a car business out of nothing. And this to me like reeks a little bit of the same problem. If Apple really was close to actually delivering a modem maybe in 2025 or 2026, we would probably be hearing much more positive reports. Now, there's always a chance that you hire one extra guy, that guy happens to either be a genius or completely lucky, and you get a major breakthrough that you haven't been able to crack for 3 or 4 years, and finally the project starts running smoothly. However, that is more an exception rather than the rule, and there's also just a counterpoint that if you are a genius in the modem development business, well, if Apple is willing to pay you crazy amounts of money, you might want to go to Apple. However, if you see like their business like this division starting to fail, wouldn't you rather go to Qualcomm or Broadcom or any of those companies where you are actually working with people who might be somewhat on your level? Because apparently seems not to be the case for Apple's modem business. So again, there were rumors about it being partnered with a low-cost iPhone SE, which I think would speak of the fact that Apple's 5G modem probably doesn't have millimeter wave capabilities. That to me is not an issue. My iPhone doesn't have millimeter wave capabilities because I'm in Europe, and Apple still has yet to release a millimeter wave compatible iPhone outside the United States. I think that millimeter wave is a dead technology. I think it's completely unnecessary. It gets covered up by leaves and rains. You have to basically sit directly in front of the 5G tower, or it's not really a tower, it's like a fridge-sized device from what I understand. It's completely pointless. We would all be much better off with a lot more Wi-Fi hotspots, in my opinion, since Wi-Fi by itself is more efficient than cellular, and Wi-Fi also by itself probably wouldn't like eat into your data contract. So that's just one thing, but yeah, it might not happen this way. I do believe that, for one, I do believe in this new iPhone SE, because obviously Apple would have to like launch some kind of low-cost iPhone with USB-C, given European regulations start falling into place next fall. This is really important for people to consider, because when people think that Apple switched to USB-C on this year's iPhones because they were already mandated to, that is not the case. The mandate only starts next year. However, Apple wanted to get ready a little sooner, and it's very likely that they will keep selling iPhone 15 models, not iPhone 15 Pro models, but the regular iPhone 15 and 15 Plus throughout next year and the year after. So might as well just make them USB-C, not having to redesign them later on. However, when it comes to older models in the lineup, they are still obviously completely fine, still being sold even here in Europe, the iPhone 14 and stuff like that. And if Apple basically looks at the iPhone SE, looks at the iPhone 14 and creates like a device somewhere in the middle, but it also has USB-C, I think this is a device that Apple quite honestly needs. But I also think this is a device that would have to come out next year probably. Definitely in Europe though, if they want to sell it. But it would not be ready, even if Apple like was only ready with their modems by 2025 or early 2026. That would just be too late for the iPhone SE, if they even make that date. It's pretty likely that they won't. If they're still failing this hard in fall of 2023, we're almost in 2024, I'm kind of inclined to believe that we will not see anything before 2027. And if we don't see anything by then maybe it's all completely dead. Development on the modem chip was said to be in the early stages, and it may lag behind the competition by years. One version in development does not support faster millimeter wave technology. So yeah, this is something that you actually can. This is, by the way, why I always try to go with through news together with you guys, because I think we can intuit a lot of this stuff by ourselves. Because if we ask ourselves, oh, Apple does not offer millimeter wave functionality in like 85% of markets, if you count the US as like more than one market because it's just so big, so influential, right? So why would Apple even make it a millimeter wave compatible modem? It requires like the extra like antenna technology. It requires like that little plastic cutout on the side of the iPhone. Yeah, I just don't think that millimeter wave was ever that likely. Apple has also run into issues with the Intel code that it has been working with, so I assume that goes back to like the non-working prototypes, where maybe the technologies that just didn't communicate well with each other. Rewrites have been required, and adding new features has been causing existing features to break. Plus, Apple has to be careful not to infringe on Qualcomm's patents. Yes, Apple has a patent sharing agreement with Qualcomm, but that obviously does not entitle them to use all of them. There are limitations here. And despite delays, the company was thought to be continuing development because it is eager to add its expensive deal with Qualcomm. It's important Apple pays like a small commission per device, and then obviously for every modem they buy. So it's a very expensive contract. You can really feel that Qualcomm is a little bit of a monopoly in that regard. I actually am quite interested about a specific thing right now, so forgive me briefly. Qualcomm. Yeah, Qualcomm is up by 3% today, the stock. So that's actually quite interesting. That's on the German exchange. How is it doing in the US? Qualcomm stock. Yeah, it's up around 2%, which obviously if this was like a 100% confirmed rumor, I wouldn't be surprised if like the stock was up by 5% or 10%. But yeah, it obviously is extremely positive that even if Apple at some point manages to make their own modems, by now it seems very likely that they would have to extend their own modems, extend their deal with Qualcomm for their modems. Now, this is the last issue that I wanted to cover, because I actually think this is the worst one for Apple, but it might ironically be the best one for us consumers. Now, I am somebody who, in my heart of hearts, believes that paying a little more for a good product is fair if that product is actually good. And for me, Apple products mostly have been worth that extra money. I have complained about specific things that I don't consider are worth it, but I have to sort of bite the bullet because it is kind of on the device that I want to have, right? Like Apple's RAM and storage pricing. I don't like that, but I actually think that Apple's base prices for their devices are mostly very fair. Do I like, for example, that Apple might have to increase prices down the road, maybe because they planned to keep the same prices because other costs are going up, but they hope that their own modem would bring that part of the device down in cost. But now they have to keep using Qualcomm, and with inflation and everything else, they would have to raise prices finally, sort of. I don't mind that, because if Apple's solution would be so inferior to Qualcomm, right? Potentially less efficient, potentially less stable, potentially with worse range and stuff like that, then why would I want to save $100 on a device that potentially is already above $1,000, or in my case, close to $2,000, as I have a 1 terabyte Pro Max iPhone? Would I really want to spend to save around 5% of the device costs potentially, but get a significantly inferior cellular reception, which is also ends up being less efficient, could potentially eat more into battery life. It could start heating up more, which would require Apple to actually make the device more expensive by putting in more cooling, or they would just have to accept that the overall device experience is worse. So I actually think that for Apple, obviously they've by this point spent billions on this. Not only have they acquired Intel's business in 2019, but I actually think, what was the exact cost? Yeah, around $2 billion. So Apple acquired it from Intel, and then they now spent 4 years of research development time on it. They had to make prototypes for it. They had to pay 2,200 Intel employees. I don't know if some of them maybe potentially were let go over time, or just maybe wanted to leave. But just so you understand, by the way, I previously mentioned it's like 100 people. That was just an example. I know it's way more than 100 people. So, yeah, this is actually a big thing, because this is actually where I say, for example, when people like ask like, oh, Apple just uses Samsung panels, but then you actually look at how Apple's display behaves, and then you compare it to similar generation Samsung displays, and they do have like somewhat different peak brightness, HDR handling, and stuff like that. Apple, thanks to their own display controllers, is better at actually enforcing 1 hertz for the always on display mode, while Samsung has been notorious for still like running at around 10 hertz. And we see that how Apple uses a technology that is sort of off the shelf and sort of developed by them to their own benefits. And I think that with modems we kind of hoped for almost the same, but obviously, once Intel went away, Apple had to take up the entire business. And now I don't know if they would actually end up saving a lot of money versus just buying Qualcomm technology if they have to keep running their own competitive modem business that doesn't fall behind Qualcomm or Broadcom or whatever other player there is, right? The benefit for Qualcomm is that they sell to Apple, Samsung, Xiaomi, all those other companies, right? Even for like laptops, there are many now that have 5G modems in them. That works for Apple in the Apple Silicon space, because Apple makes processors for the iPhone, the iPad, the Mac, even to a degree for AirPods, Apple TV, and they can even reuse certain processors for that stuff. It works for them there because Intel, while yes, Intel can address a large market, well, Intel already isn't addressing the smartphone market, which makes their chip business far smaller than Apple. So they could maybe use Qualcomm's, because Qualcomm is like targeting smartphones, which is obviously a large business, so they're making a big down payment on that research and development. But Qualcomm only now is somewhat catching up with Apple's like desktop processors, and even there they still won't have anything to actually rival Apple's Max or Ultra chips. So you see why Apple Silicon makes sense to be completely in-house developed and then produced by TSMC. It makes sense for Apple to use the base technology from Samsung, but then build on top of it and have a screen that they know can deliver the peak brightness that they want, the HDR behavior, the promotion behavior that they want, right? But with modems, the question comes, if you have to invest so much crazy money in such long periods of research and development, and you end up producing a product that is still behind the competition, remember like the pre-iPhone 12 days, right? Apple has been known to have one of the worst modems out there because they were using Intel modems. Now, they were saving money on it, and they were not having to pay for the R&D for that, so maybe that was worth it for them at that point. But now they would really have to find some kind of like magic solution to bring down costs for this, so even if it's worse, it ends up making sense for them versus using Qualcomm. Right now, Apple is actually having an extremely positive reception to using Qualcomm modems, because they've started using Qualcomm modems on the iPhone 12. They've actually really built on top their external antenna design that was like panned on the iPhone 4, but like once Apple hit like their stride, their antenna started working really, really well. And then since the iPhone 12, the iPhone 13, 14, and now 15 all have had actually industry-leading download speeds, for example. So it seems like, however, Apple is now integrating the Qualcomm modem with their antenna, with their SoC, even with their operating system, right? Which apparently this is a problem with an Intel modem, or even an Apple in-house developed modem, but by former Intel engineers. It seems like the OS is working well with the modem. The antenna is working well with the modem. The battery life is quite good. So I don't know if ultimately this makes a lot of sense for Apple to pursue. I think it makes sense for Apple to try. kind of how I also think it makes sense for Apple to even try and make their own Wi-Fi chip, right? But ultimately, they might be better suited buying from the shelf solution, because a company like Qualcomm can invest like billions and billions because they know that they will have customers either way. Apple at some point will have to maybe understand that their investments into this are not producing the result that they want, and that most importantly consumers wouldn't want. And this is how we end up at Apple potentially discontinuing their 5G modem. Now, it should be noted, as I said before, this is from Ukes1122 and from a tech leaker, a tech reef leaker from the Japanese supply chain source. Now, it's important that Apple's modem wouldn't be even entering the supply chain right now, so I don't know if like his leaks don't necessarily have to come directly from the supply chain. He might have some leakers also at Apple, but he says that he heard similar reports from a Japanese supply chain source, so maybe that supply chain source has sources inside Apple. So I'm not trying to sell you this as like 100% proof, but I do want to cover the nuance here, trying to tell you that one division at Apple being on fire actually matters very little for us as consumers, because most likely this would end up with Apple just keep using Qualcomm modems, which yes, in the long run might result in slightly more expensive iPhones. However, I'm extremely happy with the 5G connectivity on my iPhone 15 Pro Max, as I've been prior with my 13 Pro Max. Even from what I heard from people who had like the iPhone 12, which was when Apple like first really starting to go all in with Qualcomm, because obviously that was when they adopted 5G. They've had like Qualcomm modems prior, but they were usually using a mix between Intel and Qualcomm modems. But once they started doing that with the iPhone 12, we've started seeing incredibly positive result, incredibly positive reception by the community. So as much as my thumbnail is Apple being on fire, fundamentally, I don't think we as consumers have much to worry about. As I said before, NameDrop is 0% an actual security or privacy risk. Apple Card being discontinued might be a little bit of a small adjustment thing down the road, maybe in 12 to 15 months, depending on what Apple exactly decides to do with it down the road. And Apple discontinuing internal developments of a 5G modem could potentially down the road result in slightly more expensive iPhones, but also iPhones that keep using the industry's best 5G modems, which definitely is a compromise I'm willing to take. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm back. I hope to be doing a video either tomorrow or the day after that. At the worst on Saturday, I apologize, but definitely no 10-day breaks for the next 2 weeks or something like that. I'm really glad to be back. We have 66.6 thousand subscribers. I really appreciate that. If you like what you're seeing here, please subscribe. Please share, please comment, please hit the like button. If you want to support this channel directly, because hey, I'm just a hobbyist YouTuber, I don't have a side job or anything, and this obviously costs a little time and a little money to do, you can find my Patreon link in the description of this channel, or you can support me directly while I'm live with a super chat or a super sticker, or once a video has actually already been processed, you can still send me a little something called a super thanks. So that would be very much appreciated, and then you'll get a big thanks from me in return. I'm really glad to be back. Please let me know what you would like to see me cover next. We just got a new iOS 17.2 betas. Maybe there will be something very interesting in there. whatever other news, not just in the Apple space, we might start seeing much more detailed breakdowns of devices now with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, which seems to have a pretty impressive GPU. So once we get beyond just testing artificial benchmarks, I would actually really like to dig deep into it. We've had a ton of coverage on the M3 processors from Apple in their latest laptops and the new iMac. I've covered a lot about this, but obviously if there's something new on this issue, I will keep covering that as well. And as always, I'm also open to news from other companies and not just Apple competitors, but I'm also always interested in the gaming space. Maybe I will like live stream the Game Awards or something like that. Just let me know what you would like to see. Please follow me on Twitter if you want to converse with me directly. I'm quite active on there. I'm not calling it X, and I'm absolutely willing to criticize it, but for now I'm still there because I have actually met a ton of amazing people there. So now my voice is actually giving up because it's actually quite dry here, because obviously it's quite cold outside, so the room has to be heated up a lot. So I thank you so much for your incredible support for this channel. We'll see where it takes us. I never expected to already be at 66,000 subscribers. So let's keep enjoying this amazing journey together. See you guys next time. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.